Shlosberg. I am a criminologist and co-host of the podcast Women in Crime. I am joined by
Meghan Sacks, also a criminologist and co-host with Amy of Women in Crime.
well, today we have an update on the case of the four murdered Idaho college students, where new information was released about what happened that night, and we learned what evidence finally led to the arrest of suspect Brian Kohberger. Now, for a recap of the case so far, you can watch our previous video. You can watch our previous video where Megan reports outside of the Monroe County Jail in Pennsylvania, where Kohberger was first held after arrest.
On January 3rd, while still held in Pennsylvania, Brian Kohberger appeared at the Monroe County Courthouse, where I was standing, and waived extradition proceedings, agreeing to return to Idaho to face charges. The next day, January 4th, Kohberger arrived in Moscow, Idaho, by a small plane registered to Pennsylvania State Police.
Now, Idaho law requires that the accused see the arrest warrant before an arrest is made public. So we didn't have much info until on January 5th, when Kohberger made his first court appearance in Loudoun County, and the court records in the case were unsealed, which included burglary and 4 counts of murder in the first degree.
The details were released in a 19-page affidavit, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen this affidavit. I think we were really eagerly awaiting this. Affidavit is just a document submitted to the judge to request an arrest warrant, and it has to establish basically probable cause for this arrest. So we looked over this, we pored over it like everyone else, and we kind of digested it. And today I think we just want to cover probably the big takeaways from this affidavit.
Yeah, so just for a little summary of the main points, the police responded to a 911 call to the home where they discovered on the second floor Xena Kernodle and her boyfriend Ethan Chapin, both deceased with visible stab wounds. On the third floor, they discovered the bodies of Madison, Mogen, and Kaycee Goncalves, both in Madison's bed and both with visible stab wounds. Kaylee's dog was also found. He was alive and he was in the bedroom next door.
Now, the info that was released suggests a very tight timeline. I think that's one of the big takeaways here as well. All 6 occupants of the home that night, the 4 victims and the 2 other roommates who survived, they were all back at the residence by 2 a.m., Amy? I think it was, and asleep in their rooms by 4 a.m., except for Xena, who received a DoorDash order at approximately 4 a.m.
Now, we know from the affidavit information that we didn't know, which very importantly is from the surviving roommate who reported being awoken around that same time to what sounded like someone playing with the dog upstairs. She then heard someone say something to the effect of, "There's somebody here," and she believes this was possibly Kaylee. However, this also could have been Xena, given that her phone indicated the use of TikTok around 4:12 a.m. Now, the same roommate then says she heard what sounded like crying and a male voice saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." And then a third time, this roommate opened her door and reported seeing a masked man, whom she described as 5'10" or taller, athletically built with bushy eyebrows. She said she stood frozen in a shock phase, and this man walked past her to exit the home.
There's been a lot of question about this. So, we have this eyewitness account, but the same eyewitness did not call 911 until about 6 to 8 hours later. And so many people are wondering why. Why would she have waited so long? And I think there are several potential explanations. Would you agree?
I agree. And I think it is unfair. She's a victim in this case as well. I mean, we hear a lot about fight or flight, but there's also a third option, which is freeze.
Hmm.
So it is possible that she was frozen in fear.
Right.
We also don't know, everyone reacts differently to traumatic situations, and we don't know
Absolutely.
her past, and we don't know her disposition, and we can't judge her response to what happened. And it's possible she was inebriated. They were out drinking that night.
Yeah.
Maybe she passed out.
She absolutely could have. I think also the freeze situation, maybe people assume it's like a quick, situation, but it could also be that you're frozen. You're almost paralyzed in fear
Mhm.
for some amount of time. It could have been several hours. It's possible that she went to sleep and thought it was a dream. I mean, there's just any number of possibilities on why. I would probably speculate that it was, almost like paralysis due to fear. which you can't put a timestamp on.
I mean, it's also possible that she thought this was just a guest, right?
Yes.
Because from what we know at this point, she didn't see a weapon. Perhaps she did not notice blood. This could have just been one of the roommate's visitors, for all she knew.
So people might think it's strange, right? Because there's a mask, but
Hmm.
you have to remember, we're still kind of we're in like a post sort of
Hmm.
COVID situation. And during this time, people are still wearing
Yep.
masks all over. And we know on our college campus,
Yeah.
half the people are wearing masks. So it's not as odd to see someone masked in your home as it would have been prior to COVID, I think.
That's a good point. And a lot of people ask, why didn't this intruder kill her as well?
Right.
And I think there's several explanations for this.
Yeah.
Perhaps she wasn't the target.
Hmm.
Perhaps he didn't even see her, because it is
Yes.
possible after you commit a murder, for a quadruple murder in such quick succession, we know it's such a tight timeline. It's
Yes.
possible he was in a trance state,
Yes.
didn't notice her, or was just looking to get out. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because of the tight timeline, I think there was almost like a rush. So it could have literally been that, just a
Mhm.
rush. Got to get out of here right now. I think, again, we could speculate all day. But there's just so many possible explanations for this.
I agree. And we do have more information now about the security, about the timeline and what the security cameras in the area picked up.
Right.
At 4:17 a.m., a security camera located near the home picked up a distorted audio of what sounded like voices or a whimper, followed by a loud thud. Now, based on these events, authorities believe that the quadruple homicide occurred sometime between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m.
This is such a tight timeline, but it's also, I think, 4 a.m. I'm not sure that's correct
Mhm.
because I think they established it would be 4:04 a.m.
Yes.
if we're looking at if Kohberger is in fact the person, because I believe it was shown that he got out of his car at 4:04 a.m. Is that correct?
Yes, we'll talk a little more about the timeline of the car, but yes, I do believe the timeline's even tighter, and I think it brings it down to less than 15 minutes to murder these four individuals.
That's a very short timeline.
It is. And, you know, at the scene, the police were able to obtain male DNA, and I think this was what
Yes.
kind of cracked the case, in addition to some other things. But from the button on a knife sheath that was left behind near one of the victims' bodies. And we must talk about this for a moment,
Of
because
course.
this is sloppy to leave such a big piece of evidence at the scene.
Yeah, I think it's very sloppy. It's probably indicative of nerves being interrupted, have to get out. There's a big rush here. So
Hmm.
it's either really sloppy or left there on purpose, which happens, especially with like serial type offenders and whatnot. They leave things at the scene, calling cards, marking their territory.
Trying to toy with the police, you're suggesting? It's
Someone
possible.
possible. I think it was more likely just a rush and something that was forgotten. I think if this was in fact Kohberger and this is his first offense and first time committing a quadruple murder, I'm sure the nerves, the unfortunately, I think excitement, anxiety, all of
Mhm.
these things, probably he did not expect this type of reaction.
Well, luckily he did leave him. Luckily, the suspect it did leave that there,
Yeah,
because the DNA at the crime scene, the DNA at the crime scene was later matched with another sample that was taken from Brian Kohberger's family's trash can in Pennsylvania.
correct.
So, this is what is known as familial DNA.
Hmm.
Essentially, they found a match that was 99.998% probability of being the father of the person's DNA that was found at the crime scene. Now, this is not the same technology as was used in the Golden State Killer
I know.
case, and that was known as genetic genealogy. And that's where they used the family tree database to match distant relatives.
Right. This is more like a paternity match, isn't it? Essentially. I mean, we're talking about one DNA source, the father,
Hmm.
matched to
Yep.
the son. Okay.
Yeah, it's one that text just looking at the Y chromosome and other markers to see matches. I mean, investigators also found a latent shoe print
Right.
during the second processing of the crime scene. And the shoe print showed a diamond shaped pattern, which is similar to that of a van style shoe. And this was just outside the witness's bedroom.
I mean, obviously, I'm curious. We've heard about this, but I'm curious if he had the van type shoe. We haven't heard anything about that yet.
No,
So
but I would imagine that they have that information.
I imagine that. I think we should turn to the other big, piece of evidence here, which is the car, right? A review of the camera footage showed a white sedan in the area around 3:26 a.m. without a front license plate. The suspected car was then seen making what, 3 passes by the home?
Yep.
Was it something like that?
And this wasn't a heavily trafficked area.
No, I don't think so. I think this is really damning. And the car made a fourth and final pass around 4:04 a.m. before stopping at the area. And I think that's why I had changed the timeline from
Yes.
4 to 4:04 because the car stops at 4:04.
Yes, and also if you'd have to imagine that it takes him at least 1 to 2 minutes to get out of his car and into the home. So that even tightens the timeline a little more.
I think
And
so.
then only 4:20 a.m. the suspected car could be seen leaving the area of the home at a high rate of speed. So again, that timeline is tight. And then at approximately 5:25 a.m., a car consistent with the suspected vehicle was observed on 5 cameras in Pullman, Washington, and on the WSU campus cameras. And that is, in fact, where Brian Kohberger resided
And attend school.
and attends school.
I mean,
Yes.
this does not look good for
No.
Kohberger. This is, very damning evidence, I would
Mhm.
say. As the investigation progressed, police obtained search warrants to determine cellular devices used in or in proximity to the home,
Mhm.
right? You want to talk a
Mhm.
little bit about what they found from
Yeah.
from his cellular phone data?
So through research, investigators were able to show consistency between the suspect's cell phones, estimated locations, and the location of this vehicle.
Hmm.
However, interestingly, the cell phone towers did not show proximity between the hours of 3 a.m. and 5 a.m.
So what does this tell us? The phone is out of play from 3 to 5 a.m. Okay. What do we think this tells
I mean,
us?
this could be someone turning off their phone or putting their phone in airplane mode. It's just very convenient that it happens to be the exact time of when this crime was being committed.
It's very convenient, and I think probably, the public thinks, or not the public, I would say, but he thinks if you turn off your phone during this time, then
Yeah.
there's no tracking.
Yeah.
But I think the suspect or Kohberger forgot that there's all that data around this. It's what you do before. It's where it
Yeah.
puts you, and then it's what it looks like to shut the phone off.
Yeah, I agree. And these electronic records also revealed something more. It showed that there were prior visits to the area, which I think we can all agree indicates some sort of stalking behavior.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised to see that there were prior visits. I'd suspected that there was probably a couple,
Hmm.
familiarity with
Hmm.
it. However, I was surprised by the fact that there were at least 12 visits that were
Hmm.
documented, and we don't know, right, that he had any connections with anyone else in that area. It seems like it
Hmm.
was 12 visits made to
Yeah.
this home, stalking. I'm not surprised when we have situations like an escalation with
Hmm.
violent crimes, especially when it escalates
Hmm.
to murder. There's definitely usually a stalking pattern ahead of time. So this was not a surprise, but I guess the sheer number
Yeah.
was kind of shocking to all of
And
us.
if you recall, very early on in the investigation, there were rumors that Kaylee did have a stalker,
Yes.
and that was put out there very early. So, is this in fact the person who was stalking her? I mean, we have to wait and find out, when we get more information. But
Sure.
lastly, the suspect returned to the scene of the crime around 9 a.m. for
Yes.
reasons unknown. Now,
Okay.
this is very interesting because
Yeah.
obviously just speculation here, but could it be that he went back because he realized he left that crucial piece of evidence at the scene? Or was he maybe trying to check out what was going on, the police activity?
I think it could be either. I think probably it was the anxiety and having to go back and see what's going on. Like, where are they?
Hmm.
Have they been discovered? How many police are on the scene? I mean, it could also be the third option that some, offenders go back to relive the experience. That typically happens later, though. So I'm going to say this probably isn't the most likely
Hmm.
option. I think it was probably a general anxiety about what I left at the scene, how many people are there, what does the scene actually look like now, wanting to know.
Either way, it's very risky. And I think it
Yeah.
just shows his state of mind and his level of possibly narcissism.
I think he definitely displays some narcissistic traits,
Yeah.
but I think this was probably just more of a panic,
Yeah.
to be honest.
So this coupled with other corroborating evidence, it sounds like the state has a very strong case. So what's next in legal proceedings? Now,
Right.
there's one of two ways that this could go.
Right.
Either he will have a preliminary hearing, and this is where prosecutors will present evidence and witnesses in open court, and the judge will decide whether a case is sent onto the district court. Sometimes defendants can waive their preliminary hearing.
Yes. Alternatively, Kohberger could go through the grand jury process, where the grand jury would review the evidence and decide if there's enough for an indictment. Either way, whether it is, an indictment or whether it's, the judge that decides, if the case proceeds, Kohberger would then have an arraignment hearing.
And that is where he would enter a plea of guilty or not guilty. And I
Mhm.
think that's what, at this point, everyone is waiting to hear.
Right.
Because after that, the prosecutor and the defendant can engage in plea negotiations.
Right.
Otherwise, both sides will prepare to go to trial. And we know that can take a year or more.
Oh, yeah. In this case, it's going to take at least a year, but I would say it would be more like 2 to 3 years.
It'll also be interesting to see a plea negotiations are not even always on the table because the
Right.
prosecutor has to weigh the needs of the victims' families. And the victims' families, at this point, at least one of the victims' families, had publicly come out and said that they want the death penalty sought for
Okay.
this suspect.
Right. Yeah. This certainly, they don't need to offer a plea. We know that they have a strong case. However, in the interest of justice, if there was a plea, the only plea here is going to be life in prison without any possibility of parole.
And the families, obviously, they're coming from a place of emotion at this point,
Yes.
but they might not realize that going to trial might not be the best decision because then they have to relive what happened. And
Right.
it's often prosecutors, for the interest of the families, will
Yes.
plea the case so the families don't have to sit through a whole trial.
There's also going to be the public, though, strong outcry here. I wonder, is there going to be a strong demand for
Well, 'cause
death?
people want information also.
Oh, right. Okay. And I think we should also look at the fact there's another option. Whether it's a guilty plea or trial, there could be, we haven't seen, there could be a, you
An, aff-
know,
an affirmative,
right,
an affirmative defense where he's claiming
insanity.
insanity.
So
I
was,
can't imagine that. That would be a stretch, but
I think we haven't seen enough evidence. I don't know what his state is yet, but it's a possibility, given that the evidence is so strong and we don't know his mental state yet or his
mhm.
background. I think we can't rule that out.
No, absolutely not. We definitely can't rule that out. There's a lot of possibilities here. I
Yeah.
mean, we're going to be following the story very closely.
Right.
And we will definitely report back as more information comes out.
Sure.
But Megan, before we sign off for today, there's a few other areas I'd like to touch on.
I know where you're going. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the first one is, I was, I followed this case very closely.
Yes.
And part of where I followed was on Reddit.
Right.
And there was a lot of what we would call web sleuths.
Yes.
People that have different theories about who committed this crime.
Right.
And there were a lot of names thrown around.
I was surprised. Just people throwing names out in a quadruple
People
homicide.
watching like the videos from the food truck and saying this person acted creepy or this person looks
Right.
strange. And I have to admit, Megan, I fell victim to what we know as confirmation bias, as
Okay.
other people did. What that means is when people put out a theory that they believed it was one individual, all of a sudden you start seeing evidence that confirms that possibility that it was that suspect.
Right.
But then somebody can say, no, but it was this person. And then all of a sudden, somehow the evidence fits that person
yeah, their actions are interpreted within the,
within the confines of the theory of who the suspect is.
right.
And that's dangerous. And I consider myself educated in this area. And I was even
Well, you
falling
are.
prey to that.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the bulk of your research, but
Yeah.
it happens. I mean,
Yeah.
I think this is why it's not a conscious process, right?
No.
But yeah, I was surprised at the number of names that were thrown out very early. I mean, this is very serious to name someone. This is not like naming someone for jaywalking.
Yeah.
And I thought that was one of the scary side effects of this case and the publicity that it's received.
And a lot of the people who were named as suspects were actually victims or loved ones of the victims in
Right.
this case. So
Right.
it's really unfortunate. So I think people need to keep that in mind. And along those lines, I mean, Brian Kohberger is innocent until proven guilty. And although we see very strong evidence, he deserves his day in course, like
course.
any other suspect.
Of course.
And he is that's all he is at the moment, and a suspect.
I think, yeah, keep
Hmm.
that in mind. There was
Yep.
a second aspect that I wanted to discuss aside from the web sleuth, and that was there seemed to be frustration with law enforcement. And it seemed like people thought this was such a long time to solve this case, 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I think I just want to kind of dispel that notion
Yeah.
a little bit. Do you agree? Like, this is not a long time for this type of homicide, for this crime, for the evidence gathering.
Yeah, I think this was done very quickly. And not only that, it was done in a very smart, tactical way.
Right.
Because I think it is clear to everyone that if Brian Kohberger knew that he was suspected, he would have done some things differently. And luckily, he didn't know
Right.
because they were able to gather more evidence and they were able to wait until that right time. And people may not know, but the police, if they screw up, then the case can be dropped.
On
They
a
need to be,
technicality,
yeah, they need,
procedural errors. I mean,
yeah.
there's so much that goes into this process, to
Hmm.
make it perfect.
Yep. Because if they violate any of a suspect's rights during the process of evidence gathering, the
Hmm.
whole case can be thrown out and the person will never be brought to justice.
Right.
So I don't think it's fair that people were so quick to say that law enforcement didn't know what they were doing. I think they handled this case incredible. It was some of the best police work I've seen, and we don't even know the half of it yet.
No, we don't. But I thought it was solid police work and a solid evidence gathering, waiting to the right time. The arrest went smoothly. Everything, afterwards has kind of gone well, I would say.
Also, if you look back to the information that, they were giving those press conferences early on, giving information, and
Right.
they had mentioned that the surviving roommates were in the basement. And now we
Right.
know that they were not even they were not even on the same floor. And I bet you this was to
Survivors.
protect the survivors
Yeah.
because maybe the suspect did not even know that he was seen. And
Right.
if that was released, her life could have been in danger.
Absolutely.
So I think that was really, that was the right move for law enforcement also.
I agree. It's very complicated what information you should release. If you release too much, it complicates the
Hmm.
investigation. So I thought it was a good job on their,
And,
behalf.
and the releasing the information on the white Elantra was huge in the case.
Huge.
And it's interesting why that they did that. And then the suspect did not get rid of the car and continued to drive it cross country.
Across the country, yeah.
And I think that that's probably one of the many pieces that led to this suspect was that
Absolutely.
people called in the fact that somebody had that car sitting right there in that,
Car was a huge
10 miles
piece.
away from the scene. Yeah.
The car was a huge piece, I
Yeah.
think. It seems very obvious. Like there's a lot of evidence, right?
Hmm.
So we can't speculate too much about what the
Yeah.
defense will do or will not. But one thing I would say, if they're going to trial and there's a defense, I think they're going to attack the cell phone data and the towers and you can't be sure, if it was him. That's my prediction if
You-
they go forward.
I also predict, and I hope this is not the case, but I predict that they might try to look to the surviving roommates as scapegoats. And I think that is
Yeah.
unfortunate, but we've seen defense strategies that have gone lower than that.
I mean, let's just hope it does not go
Get
to
to that
that
point.
area. And it's premature. We're just
Yeah.
speculating at this
And I
point.
would bet also, while we're speculating, that there'll be a change of venue motion.
What venue could he possibly go to,
I don't
though? That,
know.
I mean, I understand the sentiment there. Could he get a fair trial? But where across the country could he go that he
I
won't be
don't know,
well
but
known?
I will
Right.
say that they had the defense
Yeah,
probably. I think the defense has a pretty strong case on why they should change the venue.
I
So
agree.
we'll see.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot more to come on this.
Yeah, so we'll definitely be having some more of these updates as this case unfolds.
Hmm.
Thank you all for joining us today.
Yeah. Thank you for the discussion.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess we'll see you as the updates come in.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.